Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice Radio. So today, we're celebrating a little bit. You see, it is the Cyndaquil Community Day. Now, obviously, I'm going to be out catching Cyndaquil today, and obviously, I'm going to be taking my sleeping Cyndaquil with me. I'm a grown-up, honestly. But I thought what we really should do is have a look at the best Typhlosion deck ever, which is not particularly close, I don't think. You see, back in 2011, we were in a format where Typhlosion was one of the, hands down, very best decks in the entire Pokemon format. And it was all built around Typhlosion Prime. Now, Primes back in the day, for those of you that weren't playing, were the chase cards, the equivalent of GXs nowadays, except they only gave up one prize. They were just fancy, shiny, lovely cards. There was no real mechanic built around Primes, and Prime wasn't even in the name, it was just called Typhlosion. But they were the fancy cards you were hoping to get when you opened up your booster packs. Now, Typhlosion was good because it had a phenomenal ability. Afterburner. Once during your turn, you may search your discard pile for a fire energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon. If you do, put one damage counter on that Pokemon. And this is not a particularly unique ability. We see this at the moment seeing a lot of play with Malamar, although it was slightly different, more on that in a minute. And before that, we saw it on Bronzong. And then before that, we saw it on Electric for quite a while. So these accelerate energy from your discard, we've seen them around a little bit. And even nowadays, right, we've just had, very, very recently, Blaziken, which is a Stage 2 Pokemon, Fire Pokemon, which accelerates fire energy from your discard to your bench Pokemon. Now, there are two differences between Typhlosion and all the ones I've been speaking about for the last minute. First of all, you may accelerate energy to any Pokemon, not just your bench, and that makes a huge difference. Being able to just keep your Pokemon in the active and accelerate energy, being able to have a Pokemon in the active, then evolve your Typhlosion and immediately move the energy over, rather than having to have the right Pokemon on the bench, then accelerate the energy, then move it into the active after you've evolved into Typhlosion, makes a huge difference. It means you can draw something like a switch to get your preferred attacker in the active before you evolve into Typhlosion. Whereas with something like Malamar, you've got to have the Pokemon on the bench, you've got to evolve into Malamar, and then draw your something like the switch. It makes the sequencing a little bit easier, though it is a Stage 2 Pokemon. And the other big difference is that you have to put one damage counter on that Pokemon that gets the energy when you attach the energy, which wasn't such a big deal, as we'll see in a moment. Now, the attack here, Flare, Destroy, free energy, 70 damage, discard an energy from Typhlosion and an energy from the defending Pokemon. It wasn't a terrible attack, it saw a bit of play, but it was not your primary attacker. If for no other reason than it's a Stage 2, you really don't want to have to be constantly cycling your Stage 2s. No, ladies and gentlemen, your attacker in this deck was Reshiram. Reshiram came out in black and white. It saw a bunch of reprints throughout the years. Like, seriously, there was a lot of different Reshirams. And essentially, they all revolved around the Blue Flare ability. Blue Flare was awesome. Blue Flare for free fire energy did 120 damage, but you had to discard 2 of those energy, which was a pain. But then in came Typhlosion. And the thing to note about Typhlosion, it's one of the big bad Stage 2 Pokemon. It's got 140 HP. HPs were much, much lower back then. So your 120 HP, that would KO an awful lot of the prevalent Pokemon of the era. You find yourself against something like a Yanmega Prime, it's going down. Now, there were a bunch of Pokemon that were just out of reach, like an opposing Reshiram, like a Zekrom, for instance, like a Magnezone Prime. But even the ones that were out of reach, you're talking 130, 140 HP. You're talking 10 or 20 away. So what you would actually do here is you would play Plus Power. And Plus Power was a big part of decks like this because you needed that extra 10, that extra 20 damage. And that was essentially it. You attack with Reshiram, and you accelerate with Typhlosion. It's one of the more simple and straightforward decks that we've seen. We didn't even really see any backup attacker at all. I'm going to show you an example list in a minute, but Christopher Khan won the Senior World Championships for this in 2011, and his Pokemon list was a 4-1-4 line of Typhlosion and 4 Reshiram. This was a deck that played Typhlosion and Reshiram. That was what it played. They were the Pokemon that you played with this. It was one of the more straightforward decks we've pretty much ever seen in terms of a competitive format. But as with a lot of these, it was such a powerful deck, it didn't really matter. And Tom Dolezal made top 4 in Masters. And he played a very, very consistent list. Tom Dolezal was famous for being a player that would basically play once a year at Nationals and get his Worlds invite. This was before championship points, when if you just played at Nationals and did well, you'd get your invite. And he would do this by playing the most consistent list he could find of what he considered to be the best deck. And Reshiram Typhlosion really lent itself to this. Set up Typhlosion, smash with Reshiram. Use Plus Power to hit Pokemon which are slightly out of reach. Now, in terms of the trainer line here, we did see some things that were slightly different from the normal, although not a huge amount. Engineer's Adjustments was a card that was not played in every deck back in the day, but was played in this. Engineer's Adjustments was quite a nice little draw card. What you did was you discarded an energy from your hand and then drew 4 cards. And we've talked a lot lately about the fact that a pure draw 4 is something that just is never printed in the Pokemon TCG. But of course, you would play a lot of energy in this deck. And you would want to discard energy so that you could get it in a discard so that you could use Typhlosion. So actually, Engineer's Adjustments here worked very nicely indeed. We also saw the card Sage's Training, another supporter card. And Sage's Training was a real, oh my god, fingers crossed kind of card. It was an extremely aggressive card, which could backfire massively. What you did was you looked at the top 5 cards of your deck. You put 2 of them in your hand and you discarded the other 3, and 99% of the time you'd end up discarding a Sage's Training. This could backfire massively if you hit like 3 rare candy, for instance, but it was just the consistency it would give you. It let you really dig through your deck really quite nicely. And probably about the only other slightly weird card we see here is Pokegear 3.0. What this allowed you to do was look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose a supporter card you find there, and put it into your hand. Yeah, it was quite nice for consistency. Now, if we base this off Christopher Khan's list, and bearing in mind he won the World Championships, we see a lot of other cards that were very prevalent at the time. Professor Juniper, discard your hand, draw 7, a really aggressive good draw supporter. Pokemon Collector, the borderline broken supporter that let you search for 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. We see Professor Oak's new theory. I mean, it's literally just Cynthia. I mean, like, literally exactly the same as Cynthia. And it was as good then as it is now. It was just a generally good draw supporter. We see Rare Candy, obviously, but because you need to evolve your stage 2s. And even though it was a really widely played card at the time, for those that don't remember, Junkarm was phenomenal. Discard 2 cards from your hand and then grab a trainer card, back then trainer meant item, from your discard and put it into your hand. Great for consistency, great for reusing stuff like Plus Power, and great for getting energy into your discard. We also had Pokemon Communication back then, which basically let you swap a Pokemon in your hand for a Pokemon in your deck. Saw a lot of play at the time. We saw Revive, which gets a basic Pokemon back onto your bench. Very important in terms of getting a Pokemon back, bearing in mind there's no GXs back then. There's no 2 prize Pokemon. So you would expect your opponent to knock out 6 Pokemon to win the game. Ergo, hopefully 6 Reshiram, Revive gave you a fish Reshiram. That's good enough. And then we see Professor Elm's training method just let you search for a Pokemon, an evolved Pokemon. Really kind of handy because you needed to actually get rolling here. You needed to get set up, and Professor Elm's training method was a really good supporter card that allowed you to do it. You search for an evolution card. It's straightforward, but it does exactly what you want it to. And then energy retrieval, because as much as it's good to get your energy in a discard and attach it, sometimes you want to attach from your hand. Energy retrieval allows you to do so. The only other slightly weird card we see here is Rescue Energy. Because you know how a minute ago I said we really needed 6 Reshiram? And Revive gives you 5 Reshiram? Yeah, the maths didn't add up there. Rescue Energy. And these Reshiram really live their life on the edge. I haven't been explicit about it so far, so let me be so now. The second attack for Reshiram is Outrage. Outrage does 20 damage plus 10 for each damage counter on it for 2 energy. And of course, when you use Typhlosion, you put a damage counter on Reshiram. The problem with using Outrage is that in order for it to really do good, you've got to be close enough to being KO'd for it to do good. Or, well, if you want to use correct English. And at that stage, you can lose your Reshiram. Blue Flare, really, the idea here is Blue Flare 6 times for the win. But Outrage was a good secondary attack. But it's important to have something like Rescue Energy so you can reuse them at the time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the best Typhlosion deck we've ever had. That is how Typhlosion pretty much ruled the format. And given that it won Worlds in Seniors, and it made top 4 in Masters, I think it's fair to say that was one of the powerhouse decks. It probably was that year the best deck in the format. So there we go. Happy Typhlosion Community Day, ladies and gentlemen. Or Cyndaquil Community Day, however you want to phrase it. Just make sure that you share your memories of this deck or your opinions of this deck in the comment section. Go nuts, but please do remember the rule. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. And do please make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays for more Wassy action. But by far the most important thing as always is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross and you've been watching PTCG Radio.